rate analysis, which included the quotas and the import taxes and the minimum wage piece. So I decided I was being too anal here. So, if you can answer these questions without using graphs, which you can if you're really good at it, you can go ahead and do that. But if you're going to do that, in other words, if the graphs are just killing you and you're wasting way too much time screwing around with the graphical analysis, you should try to make yourself understand the graphical analysis, but you ought to be able to go through the work. I'll do one of these in a second. And basically say, okay, this is how you could explain this. So all of a sudden you say, well, I'll do it from the side. Let's say we were doing a price floor. So there's supply, there's demand, there's quantity being determined, here's price on this axis, there's 0. So you start with the market in equilibrium. So one, market's in equilibrium. And you have equilibrium price and you have equilibrium quantity. Okay, so that's our standard starting point all the time. And then you go ahead and impose a floor. Yeah. So you impose a floor, and you have to say something about the price floor. You're going to do the analysis. What do you have to say? Pardon? It's binding, exactly. It's binding, which means the price floor is greater than the equilibrium price. Everybody with me so far? That's all I've done. That's what I've done over here. But what that does is it creates a quantity demanded at PF and a quantity supplied at PF. And I guess you could describe that a lot of ways, but so you end up that you have a surplus, and the surplus is created because the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, and just so happens. So this is bigger than this, and QE happens to be in the middle. So you have, there's your surplus. So that's a standard, that's how you get to the effect of a floor. And then, you go, well, you really have to ask the question of, how does PE hold? Or PF is what we're calling it, sorry. So you really have to say, okay, if you've got this surplus, why in the world would the suppliers continue to supply these goods if in the marketplace they're only buying QD, right? That's the whole question here. Here's our surplus. And what would happen in a normal marketplace if you just said, okay, it's going to be PE. If the supplier says it's going to be, PF. If the supplier says the price is going to be PF, what's going to happen in the marketplace? He's going to have a surplus, and slowly but steadily he's going to have to clear the market, he's going to have to lower his price, right? And you'd end up here. So back at the equilibrium. What do you have to do in these markets? What is if the government's going to impose some sort of price floor, what does it have to do? So this is corn or wheat or whatever. What's it? Or milk. What does the government do next? So the government has to come into this market and do what? Say it louder. It has to buy the surplus. So then you have the surplus is purchased by the government. Feeling warm and fuzzy today, so yes.
What's the third word on the top line of number 6? Who is what?
Who is happy? That's my warm and fuzzy today. Who is happy and who is sad? Who's happy?
The
Producers are, the suppliers. They're happy, they have a much larger producer surplus. Okay? Who's sad? The consumers are sad. So who's happy? Suppliers. Who's sad? Consumers. And at this point, since you haven't done sugar, you don't do anything else to it. You answer the question that way. You go through it in a nice orderly fashion, you do all this stuff. You get credit. And you'll have learned what you really need to learn. You start out with market equilibrium, you impose a change. That's what we always do here. We impose some change in the marketplace. In this case, we're imposing a price floor. Price floor. That happens to be binding. And by binding, we mean the price, you have to say the price floor is higher than the equilibrium price. This creates a shortage, which means the quantity demanded is less than the quantity supplied. That's all we've said here. Excuse me, it's created a surplus. And then you say to yourself, well, we have to explain why we're there, because it won't stay there. Markets are always tending towards equilibrium. They're changing all the time, and prices may be changing all the time, and quantities may be changing all the time, but they're always tending towards equilibrium. When you impose a price floor, if you don't do something, it's going to tend back towards the old equilibrium. So, how does this price floor actually hold? The surplus is purchased by the government. And that's a standard price floor analysis. In Europe, they buy milk. They do all sorts of other things to control these things. So tobacco. I don't think the tobacco allotments are totally gone yet. But instead of buying tobacco, the government for years limited the acreage by law where you could grow tobacco. So it's doing another form of controlling the supply. So there are other ways to do this, but the most obvious one is the government buys the stuff up. In the sugar markets, what they do is they loan sugar producers money, and they can default on the loans if the sugar price falls below a certain amount. So the sugar producers don't care one way or another. They have a price support on that. Okay, everybody see how to do those? You ought to be able to walk through all these exercises that way, in a pretty straightforward way. But be pretty detailed. I mean, stop along each point of the way and go, okay, what happens next? What's happening in the marketplace? And how does that marketplace finally hit some sort of equilibrium? This hits some sort of equilibrium here. And it hits an equilibrium because the government buys stuff. The equilibrium is you got a surplus where the government's buying stuff. That's your equilibrium. Any questions on this? Okay, even if you're going to use graphs, and some of you are pretty good at graphs at this point, you should be able to go through these steps. This is the explanation that's taking place. And I guess I'll give you a word of caution. You don't have to write an encyclopedia about something you think you might know what the definition of the word is. So you can go ahead and say, there are fewer substitutes for booze than there are for candy. This makes it more inelastic. That's sort of enough. Okay. Any other questions? Any questions at all? You say no. Okay. We're going to do two things today. We're going to walk through the quick theory of an explanation of price discrimination and just show you what that is. And then we're, again, sort of quickly going to run through what happens in the college market with tuitions and how universities use price discrimination and student loans and scholarships to extract consumer surplus from you guys. And after that, we'll go to the board and the white paper and see if you know what price ceilings and price floors and stuff like that are. Okay. So price discrimination. So we've assumed all along, when we draw this demand and supply curve, we end up with PE and Q. In other words, the firms are charging everybody the same price. Okay? But in reality, if you think about it, there are a million things, not a million, more than you can get past your fingers and your toes, of things that firms charge different people different prices. So you can start with airline tickets, which is a very sophisticated pricing system, constantly changing. You can see that Shell Oil charges $3.29 a gallon in Madison Park. I have a very sad story of that and $2.15 on Highway 99. So this tells you why firms can price discriminate. So in Madison Park, the price of gasoline is now $3.29. They've succumbed to some price pressure. However, it is in Costco. I got told this yesterday. It's a $2.05 or $1.99, one or the other. So 8 miles away, 7 miles away. So I drove down to Portland and back on Saturday on 1 gallon of gas. Keep in mind I own an oil tanker, so it's a Suburban. You fill it up, takes you half an hour to fill the sucker up, and it burns gasoline as fast as anything can. So I drive all the way down to Portland. I go, oh, I need to fill up, I want to eat. So yesterday I get up and I have to go get the dog, and I want to take the dogs for a walk, and I'm driving different places. And I'm about to go back into Madison Park, and I look at my gas tank, and I go, oh no, I've been driving on 0 for a long time. So I have no choice, I literally have no choice, I know that I'm doing it. So, I paid $3.29 a gallon, and I thought my car took 26.5 gallons of gasoline. It takes 28.4 gallons of gasoline, at least where they charge that much. Why did I do that? Why did I buy gasoline down there? Because in a sense, I had no choice. It's different demand. There were no substitutes for me. I was sort of stuck. If I had tried to drive up the hill, I might not make it up the hill. So that there's geographical separation. If somehow consumers are separated from each other and they have different demands for goods, firms have the potential to price discriminate. So that they can charge $3.29 down in Madison Park because there's bad information, or some guy's totally out of gas, or whatever the case may be. And in another instance, they have to charge a really low price. It used to be in Seattle, and the reason you see high prices of gasoline in Seattle relative to most other places is because we don't have very many gas stations. It used to be you'd see two gas stations across the street from each other and they'd compete. The only place that I know of in Seattle where that's commonplace now is in the U District, where there are 4 gas stations right there, 5 gas stations all in the same corner, and they compete in a big way. But here they're spread out, they close a lot of gas stations. There's a lot more differentiation in what prices get charged. So, and just so you get other examples besides gasoline, if you go to the movies, you'll get charged a different price if you go to a matinee than if you go to an evening show. And if you're old, you'll get charged a different price than if you're young or in the middle. And if you're a kid, you'll get charged a different price. And again, the reason firms are able to do that is because they can isolate the marketplace. They're either isolating it by time of day, or they're isolating it by the consumer themselves. And what they're doing is they're able to say, oh, I think older people and really young people have income constraints, so I'll go ahead and price them differently than I think people in the middle who have less of an income constraint are going to be charged. So this isolation of the marketplace is really important. So we have different types of price discrimination. We'll start with first. Every person's charged a different price. So you say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would firms be able to do that in the first place? Well, first of all, can't have any arbitrage. Does anybody know what arbitrage is? No one took Latin. Okay. Arbitrage occurs when somebody buys something in one market with the immediate intention of selling it in another market because they know prices are different. So if you're selling to somebody at a really low price, you have to make sure that the person isn't just going around and selling to your customers at a slightly higher price, but undercutting you. So arbitrage is a form of dealing with, it's not exactly the middleman concept, but there is some middleman concept in there. You can't have arbitrage to have first degree discrimination. You have to isolate markets. These two really go together. And you need extremely good information. In other words, you need to almost know what each person's demand curve is. So I'm sure there are other examples of this, but the only 2 examples that come to mind to me very quickly are universities, and I'll come back to tuition in a second, and the other is healthcare. Healthcare is becoming less so. But it used to be that you would go in and the doctor would charge you, they would know what your income was, and they would know if you had insurance or not, and things like that, and they charge you different prices based on that. Now there's much more just insurance or no insurance, yes.
Sorry, for the first degree price discriminant, under that it says every person is.
Every person's charged a different price. And you say to yourself, why does this occur, and why does it make sense for it to occur? So, go back to our let's say whatever we're selling here is this could be tuition. We're selling a school year. So people are only just buying one of these things. But you've got one person that's willing to pay this amount, and the next person that's willing to pay this amount, and the next person that's willing to pay that amount. Everybody with me so far? And if you're the supplier, you're sitting there going, there's my supply curve. And if I just do a standard one-price model, I'll have this many students, QA, and that's what the price is going to be. Everybody with me so far? What happens in that case? Well, what is this stuff? That's consumer surplus. They're gains from trade there. So if this firm can figure out, this firm happens to be a university in the case I'm describing, or a medical doctor, if this doctor can figure out this patient is willing to pay $10, and this one's willing to pay $9, and this one's willing to pay $8, and this one's willing to pay $7, and this one's willing to pay $6. So in other words, he's got perfect information on people in the marketplace. And again, he can keep them separate, and you can't go ahead and say, I just got my tuition for $6 and I'm going to sell to you for $8 and the hell is the out of you. You're sort of, that's it. It's one price sitting out there. If the firm price discriminates perfectly, it can perfectly extract consumer surplus. That would be truly, absolutely perfect price discrimination. First degree. In other words, the firm wants to charge this person $10, this person $9, this person $8, this person $7, and this person $6. And again, the only way you can do that is if you have perfect information. Yes?
How often does something like this happen?
It's not common. I mean, again, this particular sort of thing, well, I'll just do it for tuitions and insurance. I mean, as close as you can get to this, I think, in everyday life, is tuition, where you do it, I forget what, you do a financial aid package. So why do they have you do financial aid packages? Well, one, what they tell you is, and it's half true, is so they can give you money, right? That's why you do financial aid packages. The other is to find out how much money they really have to give you and how much you can actually pay. So you'll note that your parents may be loaded and you may not need tuition reimbursement or scholarships or anything. And your parents may go, don't even bother, it's a waste of time. But the university will still ask. Just put a financial aid, most people don't do it, but they would like to know everybody's financial information. In other words, they want to know that person's too, rather than just assuming. Because of course, they can set some price, and if you don't ask for financial aid, they decide you're willing to pay that price. So they don't have to worry about the financial aid stuff. But they still ask for it. So it's relatively rare. The other place where it occurs, not to this degree, is in health insurance markets, where doctors know pretty much how much you're covered for. And they can go ahead and try to figure out if there's some income distinction look at addresses and find out if you're on particular stuff, and they can charge you. So doctors charge different amounts. Even if you have insurance, your code, what they'll charge you above the insurance will be based on what they think you can pay in addition. Yeah.
Would it ever be possible for like a tangible product for this to occur, price discrimination? Or these services being-
Price discrimination occurs, perfect price discrimination doesn't occur. I mean, this sort of stuff, first degree price discrimination is pretty unusual stuff. I mean, you really need to know details. And we'll come back to the tuition piece in a bit because it's even more complicated than what we're just describing here. You can also have something called second degree discrimination. Now, which is really based on the quantity that people buy. So it's sort of a different analysis. You put out a list price, but somebody goes to you and says, I can buy 10,000 of them, will you charge me less per unit? And they do that. Second degree price discrimination is really based on costs. Can you make deals with people that mean that the costs are going to be lower to you? You can make the same amount of money, or you can make a big sale. And these happen all the time, that there are quantity discounts. And the same is also true. So if you call up some firm and say, I want this one part made for me, instead of 5,000 of them, they're going to charge you an arm and a leg for that part, as opposed to if you made 5,000 of them. So it occurs when people are ordering that way too. Yes, sir.
Does that say quantity purchase?
Yes. Yes.
What is the distinction between price discrimination and like perfect price discrimination?
Perfect price discrimination is this case. It's first degree price discrimination. You have perfect information. And I guess perfect price discrimination is when you extract all the consumer surplus. In other words, there is no consumer surplus left. It's just pulled out of the system. And it becomes producer surplus. Second degree price discrimination occurs, again, on the cost side. There's still consumer surplus there. But you're able to get larger contracts and things like that because you're able to reduce your costs in the quantity world. And then we have third degree price discrimination, where you can separate markets, and that causes you to be able to avoid arbitrage. But you have imperfect information. In other words, the person's demand curve is not printed on their forehead. So again, you're able to separate markets by saying, okay, I'm going to ask for their ID, and if they're over 60, I'll give them a senior discount. Or if they're under 12, I'll give them a kid discount. Or if it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you get in less. Or if it's Monday, you get in the museum more at a different price. You're able to separate out these markets. You're able to get more customers that way. That's basically what you're doing. You're going in, your costs aren't really changing too much, but you have marginal customers. In some sense, this is what airlines are doing. They're doing this, their basic breakdown is, what can't you read?
Number 2.
Oh, but imperfect information.
Thank you.
Shout really fast when you can't read this stuff. So you're allowed to throw stuff at me. where was I? Airlines. So their basic model is third-degree price discrimination. They go ahead and look at whether you're a business traveler or a vacation traveler, and they know that businesses are less funny and they charge them higher prices and all that sort of stuff. And they collect information on you. So when you go into an airline, they know all the trips you've made for the last airline if you've been there. They have all this information. They know what your prices are. And if you order the things online, they know if you've ordered before and whether you're willing to accept higher prices and all that sort of stuff. So they may not have perfect information, but over time, they're collecting information on you. That's somewhat different than what QFC and Safeway do. QFC and Safeway collect information on what you buy. But part of that is trying to figure out their general demographic and whether they have sales in this or things like that. Other firms online do it. And I guess, I don't know, grocery stores sending me stuff, but I know that they can look and see what you're buying, and if you buy into their rewards program or whatever else they have, they'll look at your stuff and say, oh, this person buys this stuff. We'll put this on sale. That'll induce them. They don't offer it to somebody else. You know, here, you get a coupon or something. Very sophisticated stuff. I would say 20% of the economists that have gotten PhDs in the last 5 or 7 years do this sort of analysis. They're separating out markets and they're trying to collect information. They use sophisticated economic models to try to figure out how they can price differently. It's sort of interesting the first 2 or 3 times you do it. Beats it.
They have to do it like how they collect the codes, like where people come from.
Yeah, that's a starting point. Part of it's zip code information. But I mean, if you go into QFC, you have, I forget what to call it. You have some sort of QFC ID if you want to get their discounts. And you can, you know, my QFC ID name is Ronald Reagan. They wanted to know what my name was, so that's what I gave them, and I gave them and the telephone number they have is one telephone number off, and my real one they say they don't have it, but they don't know that. And that probably happens all the time. But so people cheat, but at the same time they're collecting information. They're certainly collecting information on the pseudo Ronald Reagan off telephone number. So they have the same information all the time. Again, the purpose of price discrimination is to sell more stuff and extract consumer surplus. That's what they're doing. They're either trying to make sales they wouldn't otherwise make. In other words, they're not going to sell movie tickets to kids. But for matinees, they don't have to worry about increased marginal costs. There's an empty theater. Just let them in at a lower price. Same thing with seniors. We know they're income constrained. They're cheap. So offer them a lower price and see if they want to come in. It's always been unclear to me why they give senior discounts going across the Hood Canal Bridge, but they do. Just when you see black on that, seniors got a discount. It's really weird. They do it on highways too. I don't understand that one, but when you guys in the car, you got them. It's got to go through the toll booth, right? So it happens. Everybody sort of get what's going on here? It's pretty simple, and the differences across the difference. So in a marketplace where you don't have a lot of information, you can't isolate people, you have this classic model that we're always doing. And these are common. You know, some sort of thing that looks like that are common. It's not perfect. But this sort of stuff is going on all the time. Time of day pricing is also falls into that category. Again, it's being able to separate out the marketplace. So what are we doing over on the east side now? We're putting in time of day. We do it on the bridge, but we're doing it on a lot more roads on the east side where we're doing time of day pricing on the fast lane. So if you don't have 3 people in the car, you don't have 2 people in the car, you can pay to be in that lane. And the amount you pay depends on what time of day it is. Actually, it depends on how much other traffic there is. And the same thing with the bridge across the lake here. That's a time of day and traffic. I think the cheapest you can go across is $1.87. And it goes up to, I think you can get over $4 at certain times of the day. They don't even count people, they're just looking at your car and they're doing. Okay. So I've been trying to figure out what the heck goes on in college markets for a couple of years. And I think going up the stairs out here a half hour ago, I figured it out. So let's start with here's tuition at 50,000. Here's tuition at 40,000. Here's tuition at 30,000, and so on. And there are demand curves out there that's, I mean, people are applying to whatever school this is, school X, we won't pick on. This is XU. We won't pick on Seattle today. Okay, so you have these, you have a basic demand curve to go to school, this particular university. And this demand curve, keep in mind, you can only go once. You're not going twice, so you're only buying one at a time. You can't arbitrage it. So either I guess you could sort of, if you wanted, it's like taking somebody else's SAT, but 40 degrees of long one. You can't do that one. And there are people willing to pay certain amounts to go to school there. And these amounts we'll describe as reservation prices. So that's the maximum this person's willing to pay. And if he pays a lower amount, he gets some consumer surplus. And these reservation prices are dependent upon tastes, the prices of other colleges, income, a couple other things. So the universities, what most universities have to do is they have to figure out what is this price that they set. Now, we'll go to the extreme first. I don't know how many students Harvard takes as undergraduates. Let's say they take 600. I'm pretty darn sure that if Harvard simply said, if your kid, oh, they could do it this way, this is even better. Harvard could go ahead and say, okay, if you're one of the 600 sets of parents, families, that offer us the highest price that you're willing to pay, they could extract everybody's consumer surplus and just get the highest, and they'd sell out. You know, they'd get people paying $150,000 a year to go to Harvard, for sure. And they'd probably get 600 of them. They get some that pay 125 and a few that pay 175. But to a lot of people, the money wouldn't make any difference. And at the same time, by bidding in a closed system through a secret ballot sort of thing, you could extract people's consumer surplus. You get the maximum amount they wanted to pay. And in the case of Harvard, you'd be way up here somewhere. You know, however many spaces they wanted to put out there, they'd be getting $150,000 or $2,000. They'd extract all this consumer surplus. Most universities don't have that cash flow. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that Harvard's tuition is less than Seattle's. because they have, you know, $72 billion endowment that they fork over expenses for the kids. So they're able to choose on their own margins. So it is possible to start off with, under certain circumstances, that you get a lot of people who are willing to pay a really high price to go to school. But even in the case of Seattle U, some people are going to say, I don't want to go to UW. My parents can afford it. I want to stay nearby. They coddle you more here than they coddle you at some other place. So this is why I'm going to Seattle U. I didn't mean that in a negative way. That's part of what we sell. So there's some people out there that are willing to pay for $50,000. However, if this is a one-price deal, then you go ahead and look at it and go, okay, here's the supply curve for X university. And if they're going to charge one price, they're going to charge this price. It's a little weird because of the zigzag, but you get the idea. And all these people up here are going to get what? They're going to get consumer surplus, because they're going to be paying less of a price than they would pay otherwise. So is everybody with me so far? So all we have is a bunch of kids out there that want to go to school, their parents are willing to pay different prices, and they're willing to pay different prices because of taste and price of other colleges and their incomes. The income part turns out to be really important here. So what do universities do? Well, they ask everybody for lots of information. They say, okay, what are your incomes? They can't really ask you what your tastes are, but they can ask you what your incomes are. And they take those incomes and they set up a bunch of silly rules around them, like, do you own a house or don't own a house, and that sort of stuff, which probably doesn't make sense. But. And they go, okay, tuition is $50,000. We're going to charge a price of $50,000. We're going to say this is the tuition price. So we're going to charge this price up here. That's going to be our price, and we're willing to supply that much. So look up. This is the brainstorm coming up the stairs. Okay. We're going to charge this price. Let's do it this way, so there's a little fluff here. So, yeah. Let's say $40,000. There we go. If they actually charged $40,000, they'd have two people. These two people would go ahead and go to the University of X, and that's the only people that would go there. But if they charged $40,000, what's going to happen? They're going to have. What does that look like? We just did an example of it.
The price book?
It looks like a price floor. At least it looks like the price floor in the sense that you have this big surplus. Okay? And so the university goes and it's building out and saying, oh, we're going to charge $40,000 a piece, but it's only going to get two people that sign up. So what's it do? Well, the first thing it does is it goes to the feds and says, okay, you should loan these kids a lot of money. So, and this is a real question. I don't know the answer to this, and some of you may. Is the amount you can borrow each year to go to school different based on your income level? It is. So they even looked at it. So they go in. So the university goes in. That thickens or thins the plot more, depending on how you look at it. So they go in and they say, okay, this person can go into the marketplace and get say this is a $10,000 loan, just like that from the feds. So our financial package to them is going to be a $10,000 loan. That's where they start off with. So, and then they do that to the next person, but they get down to here and the feds go, let's say this is 20,000 and this is 10,000. admittedly, it's not the scale. You get down to here, and for this particular person, because of their income, they can afford to pay $10,000. We can go ahead and give them, the feds will give them a $10,000 loan. But the person's still $20,000 short, right? So what do? They take their package and they go, "You're wonderful. We think you're great, so we're gonna give you a scholarship. Or we're gonna give you work study. Or we're gonna give you this sort of grant or that sort of grant." Until, and some of it they're extracting money from some fund. Others it's just made up. We're gonna give you a $10,000 scholarship that's gonna get you, so you look like you're paying a full $40,000. And when you get down here, they may be trying to, because they want diversity or something else, you may be getting an $8,000 loan, and you may be getting 10,000 of these kinds of scholarships that are legitimate, and another 10 or 15,000 of some other fluffy thing that is just an accounting piece for the university. But what they're able to do is what? Why do you go to school? Besides, there are moments that it's fun and stuff like that. Why do you go to college? What's going to happen to your income over your lifetime? It's going to go up. Presumably it's going to go up. And in fact, if you want to think of it strictly, and I don't think you should, but you could, if you want to think of this purely as an economic decision, your consumer surplus in going to a school is a lot tied up in what you're able to extract as higher income in the future. That's why you're going. Because you're going to go to school, you're going to have some fun, which is maybe part of that consumer surplus, but your incomes, in fact, are going to go up by, versus high school, getting a 4-year degree is worth $1.5 million or $2 million over the course of your work life. What are universities doing by using this sort of, by going and getting you to get loans, in other words, giving you higher income, essentially, and then filling in the rest with these particular sorts of grants? What are they doing? They're extracting consumer surplus. So when you graduate, and this is true now, I mean, if you look at the average amount of loans that people have, you look at law schools and medical schools, they have these huge loan bases, you know, $100,000, $200,000 in loan. That's because they're high incomes. That's why they charge these high prices and they give them lots of loans, because they can extract more income from you. So normally I'm supposed to say, we do positive economics and that's wonderful and that's the analysis, but I also think it's bad. I actually think that that's what we're doing. We're ending up with a population that the universe, and who's getting the money? So if you look in the last 20 years, think about the last 40 years, which do you think has gone up faster, healthcare costs or tuition? Tuition, way faster. And who do you think gets that money? You don't. Administrators do. Most of the costs that we see in the rising costs of universities is administration. You have something like 40% more administrators. 40 years ago, being a professor was an okay job, but it wasn't a phenomenal job. But if you get a PhD from a decent school and you're a have a finance PhD, your first offer coming out of school will be $160,000. I mean, faculty in certain disciplines get paid a heck of a lot of money. Who do you think is the highest paid? Actually, probably the top 10. Highest paid employees in the state of Washington. Medical school professors. And they juggle the money. If they get it from this pocket and that pocket, it's hard to figure it out, but they make huge amounts of money. So all this money, all these increasing costs that we've seen, and really going into the pockets of administrators and faculty, and to some extent, you know, in order to make you happy and make sure that you do want to come here, the gym facilities are better, and you know, the dorms get nicer and stuff like that. But that's not the majority of where these costs are going. They're going into some sort of, and you know, we have English professors at UW now that are probably making $80,000 or $90,000 a year. If you went out in the marketplace, you'd get a lot of people who would teach English for $40,000. And you get a lot of people like me that are adjuncts that either like to teach, I do it because I like to, believe it or not. Or you get people that go, oh, $5,000 a class, that's a good deal. And they'll go teach a class because they want to get income and the professors aren't teaching it anyhow. Being a professor, by the way, if you want a really mock job, being a professor is a great job. It's, as a friend of mine who was the chairman at WSU said to me years ago, he said, Peter, you should become a professor. There are no bosses. He was the chairman of the department. He said, no one has control over you. You go do whatever you want. Just go get tenured and you're in that city. And that's true. It has all sorts of negative connotations. I mean, I left the university probably because I got tired of that. But it is a good job. If you want a really nice, interesting, intellectual, stimulating job occasionally, it's a good job. But you guys are paying. You're the ones that are paying it. And I really believe what's happening with the university systems with all these loans, I mean, we have over $1 trillion in outstanding loans right now. So how does this start to look like a price floor? Well, what's happened is the federal government, and look at how you pay back loans. You don't have to pay back all your loan. You have to go be a teacher, or you have to do a certain thing, or you have to make a certain amount of income. But you can basically get away with paying back about half your loans. So these loans that are coming from the federal government really become just like price supports in the agricultural industry. They're helping pay that price. It's just a different sort of price support. It's pretty interesting stuff. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 10 years. I think we're actually going to see colleges start to fail. These wonderful little colleges in the Midwest that started out as religious colleges, or little tiny liberal arts colleges, they used to be local colleges and they would attract a lot of people. But they're small, a lot of them are not well known, and a lot of them are really struggling financially. And they're in sort of, Oberlin, Ohio, and there are half dozen of them or more in Minnesota. They're in weird places. You don't want to go freeze, you don't want to go there. They're struggling on a large scale. Sort of on a side note, you know where most of their assets are tied up from these little schools? Art collections. They have these phenomenal, Oberlin, which Oberlin actually does well because of the music conservatory. But Oberlin probably has 70 or 80 or $90 million. Oh, it's more than that. And you guys see the Gauguin sold for $300 million last week with somebody in Abu Dhabi. So art collections are big. But I mean, they have, art that you recognize, that you saw in some book at some point. And you wander around these colleges and universities and they have lots of art. And unfortunately, they're in this awkward position. Do you sell art to keep the university going? What do you do with it? So there are all sorts of, we're going to see all sorts of strange problems occur. But this is an interesting problem. I'm not sure I have it all the way down, but I need to go get more details on how the loan system works. But there's certainly a price support in place. And I'm very interested to see how they cap the amount of loans you can take, if that's income dependent. Because they're certainly filling up what you have to pay with other stuff. Anybody have any questions? Or better yet, have any insight? If you have any insight on this stuff, it's on, shout. I mean, it's a puzzling question to everybody right now. There's no easy system. In a lot of ways, what's going to happen if you subsidize community colleges? You're going to exacerbate this. You have more people coming into the system. You're going to have more pressure to raise prices because the spaces are going to be in bigger demand. So you're going to see that go up.
I'd say how you're saying like smaller colleges, that hurt along the rate right now. Wouldn't that give the bigger schools more leverage on raising prices too,
Well, I think there is some of that. I mean, some schools are just, well, the schools you would think would be charging these really high prices. So Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, I think still does. I know that so one of my daughters went to Sarah Lawrence, which is a small liberal arts school just north of New York City. It has no endowment. And when she went there, bless her little heart, it was the most expensive college in the United States. It was $53,000 or $54,000 a year. But the reason it was, is they didn't have the cushion space with the endowments. They couldn't go ahead and say, we're gonna give you $10,000 to $15,000, because they didn't have the money to run the place. So a lot of the people there were paying a lot of money to go there. Harvard at the same time was about $30,000, because they charge a low price, and how do they discriminate? They don't discriminate on price. Harvard basically could have zero tuition for the next 1,000 years, and it would have no impact on running that place, because they have these huge endowments. So the endowments are driving some of this stuff. In Seattle, places like Seattle, you have endowments, but they don't have $72 billion, or whatever the number is. Princeton's the same way. One place that does has a good endowment. I don't know what the tuition is, but Georgetown, I think out of all the Jesuit schools and Catholic schools, probably has the highest endowment. And I don't know how the prices fit in as tuition. But we'll see, the state schools, of course, are all under pressure on this, because the state schools don't have endowments. That's why you see these tuitions going up. And in state schools, so the University of Washington takes more and more foreign students, which it charges a higher price to. That's one of the reasons it does it, because the foreign students subsidize the state residents. So you get into all these weird pricing models. So all these schools are pricing differently. But again, I think for all of them, except for the Harvards and the Princetons, these loan packages are driving a lot of the model. So again, if you have any clever insight onto this stuff, send me a note. Okay, we'll take a break, and then you're going to bring the board and fight. So before you do that, if you want to email me, use that email address. See how to use an email system. Okay, thank you.
Is this yours? Sure. I have to. Lessons like discussion. It's like I get top back, I remember. Look and things like that. I can take notes every time that I pay attention, write it down. I can't do both. You wanna make it better on this next test? Yes. That's $5. That's $4 to go. You have to win by 2. So if I got 84, you got 85. No, it's 1 by 2. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, did it happen to me? We're just like, you know, we'll decide. Yeah. At work on the morning, and before I realized opening, I just seen it. On board, baby children, look at them, afford the morning. The orange is me, yeah. That's pretty good job.
Yeah.
Okay, the first season is pretty good story. Two mobiles from, yes, no, from one hence the castle. Name word show that.
How's that sound?
Name word.
Yeah.
You know if you're having
I
right.
thought the one that was really hard, because if you like fill in the verbs, like all of the verbs, like. It's taking forever.
I'm not gonna go to
We're on our fourth computer, isn't that crazy?
if it is, then come back.
Yeah, no, that's what she said, she's not coming back, but
Yeah.
it's the guys always
Unless I'm gonna.
email her. No, she's never met
The armor can I go in the car?
Choose your weapons.
Come on, Travis. I'm all for a shield today.
Yeah. Or not, if you don't want to.
I'm not drawing it, because I'm drawing to do.
If you have it written down.
Alex, were you at the floor meeting, bro?
I don't know. I was unaware that we had one.
What do you mean? I emailed you.
I was misinformed, Howard. I was misinformed.
Okay, draw. Go ahead and draw the model that gives you a price ceiling. And when you're done drawing it, leave space so you can just number 1 to 6 or 7 and sort of list the things that are going on.
Price floors
And assume that the price ceiling is large enough.
Yeah.
Well, wait, all we need to do is first make,
Well, economy, supply. And I. So we are, one, we're at a shortage. Supply is going to be demanded, right? You see that? Supply is
Price
going
ceiling
to
to
be
be binding,
demanded. It's about
it's
shortage.
not allowed to go above it, so to have an impact, it's going to be below the equilibrium.
Let's just not jump into
And you're gonna have a what? You're gonna have a what? A shortage.
price floor as you have. Oh yeah, we did do the number one.
That's hard. Don't do that line. I think you have to get the package here.
That will the tip was just.
So, what happens? So how much? So how much are they going to supply if the price is PC?
How much are you going to supply?
Less than the market.
Less
So
than
you're gonna have
quantity.
some, that's your, you're gonna have that much supply and then you're gonna have a whole bunch of demand, and that gives you your shortage. So you take that amount, which you have as QS there and QS there, and go up to the demand curve. What are, for that many units, how much are demanders willing to pay per unit? So go up to the demand curve from that. Yeah.
Let me supply this much. So this is rather short. Say they supply this much. How much are they willing to pay? That's not the demand curve. That's the thing. So they only supply it. Take off.
They call whatever you want.
But they don't supply that. We demand this much. They only supply right here.
Okay, listen up for a second. So if you do that, you'll see that when you put in a price ceiling, there's going to be a shortage. And the price that consumers are willing to pay is much higher, the way you've drawn it, I think, than the price ceiling. And then the question becomes, how do you allocate those resources? In other words, you have QS goods, you're not allowed to charge them more money, per se. What do you call, so what do you have? You have non-what? Non-exclusive income in there. You have producer surplus and consumer surplus that's, could be divvied up somehow. So if you look at, if you look above PC, your ceiling price, and below what the demanders are willing to pay, that's potential consumer surplus or potential producer surplus. So how does this good get allocated? If this is gasoline, how do you allocate it? So that's one of your steps. I mean, you got market equilibrium, you put in a binding price ceiling, that creates a shortage. With a shortage, that means that the price people are willing to pay is higher than what they're allowed to pay. So the next question is, how do you allocate these goods? Some sort of black market. Something's gonna bend here. You're even in, you can do it in gasoline. An example of the gasoline market is they charge you a whole bunch, they give you a free fill up if you pay $100 to get your oil changed. So you just get your oil changed every week. Or in rental controls, whatever you mentioned they did.
Charge for keys.
They charge for keys, or they charge a lot for furnishing. You develop other market mechanisms, or what did they do when they rationed gas in the 70s? You just had people in line. You rationed by waiting. But you create these inefficiencies, and the inefficiencies basically dissipate that extra consumer surplus and producer surplus. You have less goods being sold, you have QS being sold, it's at a lower price, but there are extra market activities going on that waste production. And that's basically what happens in all these price controls. You have some wasted production going on. Okay, that's enough. Okay, let's see, working in pairs or triplets, if you can do this without a diagram. Okay. So somebody closes their eyes and starts talking. So we're going to have two countries that are not trading, and then we open trade. And we're selling one good, we're selling automobiles. So when you open trade, who gains and who loses? And what is the total change in trade, total change in gains from trade? Go ahead, start doing it. So basically you have two markets, right? You have the United States and Japan. You're selling cars. It has to cost less in one country than in another country. Okay? And there's different demands. So you sort of can walk through.
So I think the lower country
If you open trade,
gains
what happens?
producing, and the bigger country gains consumer. Is able to get the way it's explained. This is the way I was reading it for it. This is Japan. This is US. Japan starts right here.
So you have a high cost
Put the markets
producer
together,
and
you
a
start
low
where
cost
Japan's
producer.
at, and it costs them cheaper to
Divide your countries up that way. One has a low supply curve,
costs
one
Toyota
has a high
10 grand, and it costs the Chevy 25 grand. So the markets start together, and then I know they produce
So
thing,
they have
and
different
consumers
prices.
pay.
So in Japan, the price is low. They have low cost
They
of
produce
production.
more, there's more people.
United
It seems
States
easy
is
because
high,
they
they
make it
have
cost
high
cheaper.
production.
Produces, yeah, because now Chevy's not going to supply it. Now in-depth graph detail, now you have to look at it, make it final. I get the.
This is the price that we charge. You can see what our consumer surplus
That's all the way around. We didn't do anything, bro. Just after that, then I just everyone let this look until one. I had to run some errands over there. His parents came for dinner. We said hi. We said goodbye to his parents. I studied last night. I sleep early. Watched TV. Woke up. I went down the village tonight. Did some errands. Now I'm here.
I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to write it.
That was your
Okay, let's try to, I drew the graphs, but fast enough. So what do we have? Listen up. We have two markets. So we have to make the assumption when we're looking at that. Assume one is a low-cost producer. And just for kicks, low demand. price is P1. And then you have the second country, who's a higher price producer, cost producer, higher demand, and P2, and P2 is greater than P1. Okay, and in both countries, there's just normal consumer surplus and normal producer surplus. So when you join these two countries together and they trade freely, what happens? There's a new price. The new price happens to be between the old prices. So P new, we'll call it P world, is greater than P1 and less than P2. In other words, in a high demand, high cost country, the price is going to fall. Who gains? Think for a second. If the price falls in the United States, who gains? Consumers. The consumers are happier because the prices fall. The world price is less than their old price. But what happens to producers and labor unions and all those guys? They don't like it as much because producers, their production has fallen because we're importing Japanese cars, so you're going to import. This is going to lead to imports from Japan. Consumers are happy. Producers. That's, at least you can read that, right? And what's happening in Japan? And these producers include labor unions and laborers and that sort of stuff. What's happening in Japan? Well, in the first country, which is how we had this set up, the consumers lose producer surplus, lose consumer surplus, I'm sorry, because the price has gone up. P world is higher than their old price. What about producers? They're happy. They're producing more cars. Producers are exporting. So they're happy. They're sad. Okay, the next part, you're going to have to go back and read your notes carefully. But this is always true. Total consumers, total gains from trade are going to go up in both countries. And that's, in fact, why we say that free trade is good. There are losers and there are winners. But in the United States, the increase in consumer surplus outweighs the loss of producer surplus. And in Japan, the gain in producer surplus outweighs the gain or the loss of consumer surplus. And the reason that occurs is because costs of producing these cars has gone down in total. The cost in Japan is driving this. So this is cross-driven. You can do it with a diagram, but you can also do it sort of running through the steps. There's a set of steps, and what you have in this particular situation is you have two markets. And as soon as you know that the price is higher in one and lower in the other, and you can tell which one is which, you can tell what's going to happen in both. So you only need two of these graphs to really get, here's Japan, and here's the United States, and we know that the price falls from P1 to P world, and the price rises from P2 to P world. And then you can describe what happens. And you can see producer surplus has gone up in Japan, consumer surplus has gone down. It's very clear. Okay, go study. On Wednesday, at 12:30, So on Wednesday at 12:30, I'll be up on the 5th floor in front of the Wednesday at 12:30. So it's an hour and a half of class. I'll be up on the 5th floor in front of the But don't wait until
Going to be free for questions a bit floor before. Yeah.